I present to you inspirational Derrick Wheeler-Smith.
Thank you, Bruce, for those kind words. Good evening. Got up here and it seems like it just went kind of dark, and a darkness covered the face of the earth. Is this where I go, let there be light? Mr. Rai, I salute you tonight as you received the Servant Award of the People. I'm delighted to be here with you on tonight, and I want to thank the Brand Kings. I want to thank Starbucks and Doomy and Dana Tade for this opportunity. The night is well spent with the program, so I'm going to not belabor the point, and I'll skip the small talk. Is that all right? My family recently moved to Eugene to pursue passion as my wife was offered an opportunity to join the women's basketball staff at the University of Oregon as their director of basketball operations. I will say whoever said that Eugene is a black man's name has never been to Eugene. Prior to our move in August, my wife was a procurement agent at Boeing. I was the national director of youth engagement with World Vision. We coach girls basketball, as was mentioned, at Cleveland High School. 18 months ago, we built a home, had our first child, and I'm 39 years old. The idea of packing up and moving was scary and like starting over. But we're committed to living a courageous life, and we decided to pursue passion over comfort. I've been home taking care of our son Judah as well as our new baby girl Jaden, and let me hurry up and say I have a newfound respect for parents who stay home to care for their families. The story's told of a man who was sick and tired of going to work every day while his wife stayed home, so he prayed, Lord, I go to work every day and I put in 8 to 10 hours. My wife stays at home and I want her to know what I go through. So please allow her body to switch with mine for a day. God grants this man's wish, and the next morning, sure enough, he awakes as his wife, and she is him. He gets up that morning before everyone, cooks breakfast for her, wakes the kids, feeds them breakfast, checks their English and math homework, puts them in the car, picks up the dry cleaning, stops at the bank to make a deposit, and goes grocery shopping. He then drives home to put away the grocery, pays the bills, he balances the checkbook, cleans the cat's litter box, bathes the dog. By then it's 1 o'clock. He makes the beds, does the laundry, vacuums, dusts, sweeps, and mops the kitchen floor. 3:30, he drops the first child off at a scout meeting, another at basketball practice, the third at piano lessons, then goes home to set up the ironing board to watch TV while ironing. 6:30, he peels the potatoes, washes vegetables for the salad, breads the pork chops, cleans the kitchen, runs the dishwasher, folds the laundry, bathes the kids, and puts them to bed. 9 o'clock, he's exhausted, and while not finishing his daily chores, he goes to bed where he was expected to make love, which he managed to get through without complaint. The next morning, this brother awakes and immediately drops to his knees and says, Lord, I don't know what I was thinking. I was so wrong to envy my wife for being able to stay home. Please let us trade back. God in his infinite wisdom replies, son, I'm glad that you have learned your lesson, and I'll be happy to change things back the way they were. There's just one problem. You got pregnant last night. It's going to be 9 months. Tonight, I stand on the shoulders of strong, committed visionaries and ancestors who toiled and struggled, who pioneered and died, that I might be able to stand here before you at this moment. We can trace that same commitment to the dawn of civilization, when my African foreparents raised the pyramids over the sandy shores of the Nile and charted and named the constellations of outer space. Or we can go back 500 years ago to the West African city of Timbuktu, when the people between the 10th and the 16th centuries made the University of Sankore in that town the leading institution of higher education in the world. Or we can go back to just 100 and some odd years ago during the mob rule, lynch law, chain gang, KKK, ride on the back of the bus, go in through the back door, drink from the colored water fountain era, where my ancestors were not allowed by law to read or write, to attend schools, or to be found in the possession of learning materials. But they loved and were so committed to the idea of learning that they would on a regular basis risk having a finger cut off of their hand, or a hand sawed off from their wrist, or an ear torn from their head, or the white-hot brand of an iron applied to their faces. They would go sneaking and crawling, ducking and dodging through cane breaks and cotton patches in the midnight hour just to be able to read over the flickering light of a candle or oil lamp. In that era, my grandparents, Leon and Ruby Flowers of Transylvania, Louisiana, lived and worked on the Wilton plantation. My grandfather Leon died on that plantation saving cattle during a flood when the levee rose up. Ironically, in that time, the lives of cattle were thought to have more value than my grandfather's. I stand on the shoulders of Arthur and Irva Wheeler of Mineola, Texas, via the U.S. Navy. My grandfather, against all odds, graduated with a sociology degree from the University of Washington in 1951. Became one of the first black probation parole officers and the first black administrative supervisor of state parolees. They took in 13 foster kids, including Leon and Jimi Hendrix, and had 3 of their own. My grandfather refused the assistance of the government and was big on feeding homeless children, but made it clear that he would never allow racism or other people to interfere with what he wanted to accomplish in his life. If we're honest tonight, we'd have to admit that black humanity has been suspected from the beginning of our sojourn in American society. Thomas Jefferson, the architect of Monticello, the Declaration of Independence, also wrote notes on Virginia, where he questioned the cerebral abilities and the intellectual acuity and the reason of black people. Jefferson is responsible for penning what some call one of the best known sentences in the English language, containing the most potent and consequential words in American history. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So prophetic were these words that 200 years later, we have yet to live up to them. Perhaps that makes them more pathetic than prophetic. The irony is that at the time he pens these words, he himself owns between 150 to 200 slaves. This contradiction manifests itself in the fact that he didn't include slaves or black folks when he said all men are created equal. Even when at night he would retire from his study to engage in relations with the young woman whose loins trapped his logic. So the reality of our humanity being under suspicion is critical as the backdrop to understand the unfolding and evolving perception of black people in America. Our humanity has been questioned, our intelligence has been questioned, and in the United States we have to remember that under slavery, black lives were considered only a fraction of human life. So the prevailing way of valuing lives assumed that some lives mattered more, were somehow more human, more worthy, more deserving of life and freedom. Where freedom at that time minimally meant the freedom to move and thrive without being subjective to coercive force. But when and where did black lives ever really get free of coercive force? One reason the chant Black Lives Matter is so important is that it states the obvious. Nevertheless, the obvious has not yet historically been realized. Black Lives Matter is not only a declaration, it's a demand for equality and for the right to live free of constraint, but also a chant that links the history of slavery, of debt peonage, of segregation, and a prison system geared toward the containment, neutralization, and degradation of black lives. It sheds light on a police system that more and more easily and too often can take away a black life all in a flash, all because some officer perceives them to be a threat. In a world where black lives are systemically and intentionally targeted for demise, it's imperative that we stand in solidarity to declare without refrain that yes, black lives matter. And to my passive-aggressive brothers and sisters who respond with all lives matter, please cease and desist with the tomfoolery. First off, to make such a statement on the backside is not only missing the point, but it adds further anguish to an already painful reality. Us saying Black Lives Matter and you responding with all lives matter, you're actually misunderstanding the problem. But not because your message is untrue. It's true that all lives do matter. But it is equally true that not all lives are understood to matter, which is why it is precisely important to name the lives that have not mattered and are struggling to matter in a way that they deserve. The notion that Black life matters is precarious in an educational system where 3 out of 4 Black and brown children who will be the majority of our population by 2019 are unable to read or compute at grade level in 4th or 8th grade. 75% of our kids don't qualify for the military because they can't pass the exam. They either have a felony or they're too out of shape. Is the military now our high watermark? It leaves one to question, does Black life matter? This same educational system expels Black children at a rate 2.5 times greater than their white peers for the same behavior. Targeting our babies by misdiagnosing them with these disorders pushed by the American drug companies who pushed the American Psychiatric Association to adopt ADHD, conduct disorder, and oppositional defiance disorder. These folks make $45 billion a year off Wall Street. Every psychotropic drug company publicly trades on Wall Street. The drugs they're given to our children are identical to the illegal drugs that are sold on the street. So a Black man caught on the street with crack cocaine will get 5 years. But you can give these Black boys baby crack in the form of Ritalin, but nobody goes to jail. There's no difference between an illegal drug and a legal drug. They both destroy life and they both create addictions. After being drugged up, they place our children by the droves in detention and special education programs that target them specifically as being less capable intellectually. And we all know it's become nothing more than a holding cell for the state penitentiary. The disproportionate number of Black males put in the criminal justice system suggests to us there is a targeting of African American men, particularly teens beginning in the ages of 14 to 16 age range, that makes them subject to adult penalties in the system. And many of these children are tried as adults, and the book of the law is thrown at them for first-time offenses. America is the world's largest jailer, who has invested $300 billion for the expansion of the prison industrial complex's jails, prisons, and juvenile justice institutions, using the test scores of 4th grade Black and brown children to determine where they will build their next prisons. But yet they claim there's no money for schools, housing the homeless, feeding the poor, or creating jobs with a livable wage. Perhaps it's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. The 13th Amendment of the United States says slavery or involuntary servitude shall hereby be abolished except for as punishment of a crime in which the party has been duly convicted. Wow. So Michelle Alexander hit the nail on the head identifying the mass incarceration of African Americans as the new Jim Crow. And don't let them lie to you, prison is big business. And let me say, the concept of profit for prisons is wrong because it creates a demand for prisoners. I could go on and on about the prison system, new forms of population control, increasing economic inequality, and how it all affects people of color disproportionately. But my point here is that we're talking about an intentional, massive, oppressive system. And constantly at stake is a way that Black people are figured as a threat, even when they are simply living their lives, walking the street, leaving the convenience store, riding the light rail or the subway. Because in those instances, a Black life is only a threatening life or a threat to the only kind of life that matters and is recognized, a white life. Hear me tonight when I say a white life. I'm not so much talking about property of skin as much as I am a social power that reproduces its dominance in both explicit and implicit ways. When whiteness is a practice of superiority over minorities, it monopolizes the power of destroying or demeaning bodies of color. The legal system is engaged in reproducing whiteness when it decides that a black person can and will be punished more severely than a white person who commits the same infraction. The disproportionate number of black and Latino Americans being detained, imprisoned, and on death row has become a norm that effectively says black lives do not matter. The symptoms of this disease has deep roots in the legacy of slavery and continues to build up over time through daily practices, modes of address, through the organization of schools, work, prison, with this idea and view of someone who is, no matter where he is going, already on the way to prison to justify a preemptive strike in the minds of folk like Michael Dunn to attribute lethal aggression to the very figure who suffers it most. And it's so normal that he murders a 17-year-old Jordan Davis in cold blood because he felt threatened by the teen sitting in an SUV at a gas station with friends, loud music coming from the vehicle. So he shoots 9 times and then leaves to go pick up a pizza and heads home as if it's a normal Friday night, because killing an unarmed black boy is the logical outcome of a system predicated on the notion that some lives simply do not matter. Got this stand your ground law, which is nothing but Jim Crow, that started in the South with Texas and Florida leading the way and is working its way across the country. You mean to tell me you have the right to shoot me if you think you felt threatened by me? Not prove it, if you think. Look at all the negative stereotypes that are out there about the black male that sees black men as violent thugs. And if every black man is perceived as a violent thug, is there any white person who couldn't invoke the stand your ground law? For whatever reason, black masculinity expresses a menace and a threat in American culture, both consciously and unconsciously, that needs to be decoupled in the collective imagination of America. Richard Sherman is a thug for talking too much. Marshawn Lynch is a thug because he doesn't talk enough. Even President Obama has been and continues to be demonized as a threat to the American way of life. Even as foiled assassination attempts surfaced, he moved forward with a steely resolve in his bid to become president of the United States. Now, this man did it the right way. Goes to Columbia, then on to Harvard, where he becomes the first African-American president of the Harvard Law Review, graduates at the top of his class. So it can't be about the demonization of a sartorial choice. It's not as simple as cut your dreads off and don't wear a hoodie and stay out of this neighborhood and speak proper English. You sad enough see brothers in these pictures of lynchings who were dressed sharper than the folks who hung them. Now, I'm not saying you don't want to put your best forward. I'm just saying you can't dress your way out of white supremacy. The fact is, our children have inherited a culture that consciously and unconsciously engages in the skepticism and suspicion of their existence. And we must demand that our educational system creates alternative structures that allows multiple ways of learning, as well as cultural awareness classes for administrations that stigmatize and demonize them. Stop sending them to jail if they have a behavioral challenge, and figure out ways to not send them to detention, which becomes a feeding cell to jail, which becomes a warehouse to prison. Reduce the penalties for nonviolent drug offenses and for zero tolerance policies, trying children as adults and throwing the book at them. Let's be careful how we stigmatize these young people with public policies that we put in place that unnecessarily and disproportionately stigmatize them. Our vote is important, but a check is more important than going a long way. It takes money, and while we will give a Democratic politician our vote, we don't write checks, and that's where the real power is. Every group of people writes checks. It's how you effectively utilize the political system. Other groups have their needs met by politicians because they pool their money together as a group. We need to come together, pool our resources, and go with a specific agenda for African American people. We must continue to raise awareness around the issues that plague our communities. It is the telling of truth that allows the suffering to speak. And when we assemble in the streets and arrive at rallies or vigils, we demonstrate with the aim of opposing racist violence. They are speaking back to this mode of address and insisting on what should be obvious but is not, namely that the lives lost are unacceptable losses, and that violence, which usually takes place in public spaces, allows us to reclaim these public spaces to oppose racism and violence as an act that reverberates throughout the public sphere through various media. The state can no longer be our meal ticket to self-sufficiency. Until we begin to build institutions that fund and take care of themselves, we'll be constantly waiting on funding to run out. We must begin to educate young men to change their thinking and the perception of black men in the media into what we know black men are. For example, let's put to bed myths, things like there are more black men in prison than in college. That's an outdated statistic from 2007. I believe, like MLK, that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. One day we will all stand before God to give account for our lives. And some think God will ask us these questions. What church did you belong to? What Ivy League college did you attend? How many degrees did you attain? Which elite clubs did you join? Which fraternity or sorority did you pledge? How many assets did you acquire? How well did you do on your investment portfolio? What kind of cars did you drive? How many square feet was your home? But he will say, I was hungry. Did you feed me? I was naked. Did you clothe me? I was sick. Did you visit me? I was outdoors. Did you give me shelter? I was locked up in jail. Did you come see about me? Some will reply, God, when were you hungry? I would have had my wife fix the best 9-course meal you ever had. And some will reply, God, when were you outdoors? I would have taken my Visa, my American Express, and my black card and put you up in the penthouse suite at the Four Seasons. When were you sick? I would have had my personal physician come and make a house call. I would have put you on my Kaiser Permanente HMO or my Blue Cross plan. When were you in jail? I would have mortgaged my house, my car, and my business for your bail. And God will reply, inasmuch as you have done unto the least of these my children, you've done it unto me. That fatherless, street-running, riddle-filled, hopeless, depressed, baggy clothes-wearing, stigmatized, and demonized little black boy who you ignored at the back of the classroom that's been in and out of a corrupted system since he was 6 years old, as you've done it unto him, you've done it unto me. You know that fast young lady who's hotter than the Krispy Kreme sign, who has 3 children, all different daddies. 2 of them, she don't know who the daddy is. As you've done it unto her, you've done it unto me. That foul-smelling, street park bench sleeping old person who fights rats, cats, and dogs in the dumpsters for their meals, and you get mad because they try to sit by you on the 7. As you've done it unto them, you've done it unto me. Black people are children of God who deserve every protection and freedom. None of the killers of Mike Brown, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, and Ayanna Jones were brought to justice when none of those folks were armed, but all of them were black. What message does it send to our young black boys and girls about their value and worth? How do we expect them to value themselves and black life if we show them over and over again that theirs can be taken from them with little to no recourse? When Columbine happens, cameras are there. When Newtown happens, cameras are there. When Aurora happens, cameras are there, and they send all kinds of grief and trauma counselors in to help the students deal with traumatic drama that's unfolded. But when Chicago happens, nobody shows up. There's no accountability when black bodies are at stake. And what does this say to our children? The state of civilization should not be measured by the amount or the level of mechanical technology that a society produces or accumulates, but it should be measured by the quality of life it produces for all its children. If significant numbers of children are starving, homeless, miseducated, sexually violated, drugged, otherwise intoxicated, obese, suicidal, incarcerated, or on death row, then we are using the wrong indicators to measure civilized life. We can no longer afford to mouth the cliche, children are our future, because it's clear we're not talking about all of our children. Maybe we've resigned to the fact that only those who live in the right zip code deserve a quality life. November 24th, my wife gave birth to our beautiful baby girl, Jaden Simone Wheeler. What an incredible celebration of life that was. That same night came the verdict of the Ferguson jury in the Mike Brown case. And I never imagined a day so filled with joy could also be a day of such pain. All I could think about was my babies being born into a world that, despite progress, is deeply informed by racial bias, dreading the day when I would either have this conversation with them or be forced to because of mistreatment they received because of their skin color. They are so beautiful, full of life and innocent, that the thought of this reality breaks my heart. So tonight in closing, I want to share with you something I wrote to my son Judah. I don't pretend to be a spoken word artist. This is just my feeble attempt to express myself. It's titled, A Note to Judah. There is a chokehold on justice these days when it comes to getting an indictment on those who kill black men. And it leaves me to wonder, how many Emmets will we need till these chains are broken? I can't breathe. I'm the father of a beautiful 20-month-old black boy, and it pains me to think about preparing him for a world in which his survival depends more on his ability to deal with authorities than it does his own literacy. I can't breathe. Exactly when do I tell him that he will be viewed as a problem before he will be treated as a person, and that the cue they will get from his hue won't be about his pigment alone, but drawn from the poisonous well of the media's vicious assault on the black male? I can't breathe. I only want to focus on the simple things a father should have to tell his son, like stand for yourself and kneel for God, and that the only thing you're not capable of is getting rid of me. I can't breathe. I hope you never lose your curiosity, and I pray that you always confront your challenges head first with reckless abandon, as the measure of your magnificence depends on if it's something the next generation can stand on. And so I will straighten my back and work for your freedom, because you can't ride me unless my back is bent, to ensure that the sacrifices of the ancestors like Cinque, Garvey, and Tubman are well spent. In 1964, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown versus the Board of Education. May you never become a Brown who's bored with education, but seduced by excellence and never sabotaged by mediocrity. For you will grow up in a world where colorblind racism is the new racial music that most people dance to. The truth is, it only produces a pain that will never learn to harmonize. But just maybe we can invite them to revoke their citizenship from the 51st state, the state of denial. I can't breathe.